So this is a test. It's currently Thursday, 2023, October. Recording this with the new setup, the Fujifilm X-T30. Currently not on grab firmware. Interesting to set up. I was starting to write essentially the learnings from yesterday's class at Chabon. The main takeaway was this idea that we started going through the introduction of philosophy and what Aristotle's wanted to do when he was composing Logic. And at some point, I rose up the fact that my time was available for them to inquire as to anything they'd like to learn. And at that stage, one of the students, Montserrat, which is also a Escuela Nueva student, she was also a Spin student, which is interesting. Professor Spin, my math t-shirt on, I only really had him 1 year, on 7th grade, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's interesting. She had 4 years of him, but I feel like I grasped a little bit more of what he had to say in just 1 year. Regardless, where we are at right now is this idea that she says, okay, I'd like to know a little bit more about structure of lighting in Blender. I just asked for 3 volunteers and 1 person to sit on the set that I ended up building for them. Lights go off, and as I am explaining this concept to them, you really need to picture this dungeon that has just been created. So as dark as it can get, a lot darker than this. And then the 3 volunteers, I point at one of them and say, key light. I point at the second one and say, rim light. And I point at the third one and say, field light. All lights are off, and I ask them to pull out their cell phone and turn on their camera light. So at this point, I go through the process of just asking, being in this mode, right? And what I want them to do is this. Now, the issue is, this is not intuitive, because notice that from here, from this position, if I want to turn this on and off, you see how you need to press it and let it go. It's not intuitive, right? If you don't know. But anyway, now that we kind of have it, what I was trying to do is this. It's just, we had a subject sitting, and I would call out key light, and they would turn that on. And then I would say field light, and it would be this one, but in a lower intensity. And then rim light would bring them up. So you have this situation where you're constantly going over key light, field light, rim light, field light, but you're seeing the change between essentially no light, which is what I wanted to get to them, no light. Now, what I wanted to get, and I was hoping that someone would pick it up, is the fact that since this mechanism is not intuitive, the intuitive thing is just to lock the light and then bring it back up, right? So that we are on this situation where instantaneously you can lock the light and bring it back up, right? This is instantaneous, like putting your finger on the camera on the light, if you're going through this. And this is what I'm gonna talk to them about, is the idea that the finger in this instance is the most intuitive thing, right? But we don't think about it because we've stopped thinking about our body as a tool. The point is that we go through this exercise, and what happens is that their imagination sparks, like they start going wild, and I keep calling key light, feel light, ring light, key light, feel, and like getting their subconscious to assimilate how does the light work? How are we essentially connecting the dots to make it into. You can really learn about lighting a subject and what the emotion of the change in lighting does to a person. If you haven't really done this, if you haven't really sat down and analyzed how does the light influence the subject, what happens when I put something in front of the light and take light away. Now that it is a bounce light, what does it do? And subconsciously we understand when this is right or wrong, but if you don't sit down and analyze the effect, and if you don't look directly into a light and figure out, well, I really don't like it when there's a light pointed at me. What happens if we just angle it? This idea, and I'll just do it to the camera to be facetious, what eventually happened was that they understood that this light had a purpose, right? Like the key light, and then the ring light, and like the cool thing was eventually like getting them to a place where they were able to like tweak the intensity of the light. So what ended up happening was this idea that, okay, if I have a controller, this controller that I can tweak, now all of a sudden this is more intuitive, right? If we're here, this idea that key light meant brightness and fill light meant slow, like smallest level of intensity. So this is a key light and this is a fill light, but also like this has more of the intention of a key light and this has more of the intention of a fill light. Going through this process of getting your brain to assimilate and analyze what happens when you move over is key. If you think about it, this right here, this feeling of can be solved with many different tools. And intuitively, when I mentioned the fact that this is not comfortable to your eye, the first thing that they started to do was to explain to the person that wasn't able to see the reflection, like, can you just, if you wanted to keep this effect, right, of the, of the ring light, but you didn't want to have the camera, what could you do? And nobody thought of tilting, right? Which is like this idea of tilting to keep the behavior of the light but not see the light is something that if you've been on a film set, you grasp in 2 seconds. But if you haven't been on a film set, it's a foreign concept, this idea that the light is visible to the eye and it's better if it's like this, right? And even if you're like seeing the light in this instance, right, you can get the same illumination without seeing the light source on camera. And they should. You let them play with lights, and eventually they brought up a monitor, eventually they brought up the projector on the back, eventually they, like, someone started playing with the intensity of light and what it did to the shadows. Eventually we got to the place where we weren't talking about the tool, we were talking about the core essence of the subject. And this is what really creates a learning experience, is being able to zone in on a particular subject and grasp the audience attention. And at that point, you need to develop the train of thought that connects one section to the other. If you're not able to communicate the importance of the subject, it's essentially trying to teach someone how to drive. by explaining how a car works and not ever having seen or driven a car. So this concept that we are engineers that are designing a process, but we need to understand the process. We cannot jump ahead to a brown or a blue belt scenario when we don't understand the scenario and the subject at hand. Let's think about the different stages that we are going through. In this initial stage, we cannot get into the theory behind the essence. We need to get the subconscious to understand what we're doing first. And if we can do that, what happens is that we trigger a very different part of our brain. We trigger the part of our brain that is working on archival. And if we bypass the rational mind and start with the intuitive notion of what it is that we're trying to teach, all of a sudden we gather a different result, one that unlocks creativity, because you can only be creative in a field that you understand. The components are, if you are designing a system, let's say a race car, you need to know how to drive, and you need to drive the race car around. You're not going to be the person that's going to be able to pull the most performance out of the system. That's the driver's responsibility. But what you are going to be able to do is know. The driver needs to know everything you know about driving a car, but he does not need to know about the inner working of the engine. All that he needs to do is that when it hits this many RPMs, you're gonna wiggle this thing. And he needs to get really good at that, and his attention should be at getting really good at wiggling the thing, because we haven't engineered that. Therefore, we're gonna rely on the best system we have, the backup system, the human mind, okay? Now, if we're looking at this through another perspective, if we're looking at this through the perspective of the designer, then the designer doesn't need to learn how to wiggle the thing. He does need to know how the combustion engine works. And this concept of entering engineers into a system that they understand and getting them to edit the system is fine. The part that I don't understand is how do we jump from that to, in 2 weeks, you're designing new features for this system without understanding the components. Like, I understand the concept of let's make people not be afraid of editing the repo. This is positive. But the understanding and the design of a new feature in an environment that you don't grab is fascinating. It's almost, think about how ridiculous it would be if after learning how to drive and knowing that the car works based on gasoline, like at that stage, think what it would happen if I went and tried to add a component to the car, open up the hood and change it. Now, there are things that I can tweak on the car. If I want to add like car seats, or if I want to change the steering wheel cover, or if I want to add a phone holder, fantastic. That is a really good grab modification to that car. And it is a mechanical modification to a vehicle, right? We don't traditionally think of adjusting your car as being a mechanical adjustment, but for all intended purposes, it is. It is inside the car. It is a mechanism inside the car. It is not a mechanical component that's directly connected to the movement of the car. Although, if you change the steering wheel, how it feels, you could say that's also a mechanical improvement. But I digress. The important thing about this is In software and in the rest of the organizations, we are asking people to edit systems that they don't understand. And when they make beginner mistakes that could be preventable, we don't acknowledge the fact that, no, that's ridiculous. We've already solved that issue. Why would we ask you to solve? The concept is we spend a lot of money and resources solving a really hard issue. And once we've solved this issue, instead of reutilizing the knowledge from all this processing, we're throwing this away. And then when a junior person comes that's less knowledgeable and wasn't here, if this junior person could be smarter than us, but he lacks the context of what happened, and we're asking them to do an improvement on a system they don't understand. How does this lead us to augmenting human intelligence if we're doing this really stupid thing every day? Okay.